the most dreadful phenomenon in the history of humanity. War is death, blood, suffering, destruction. Unfortunately, it has been an enduring companion of human history. All known societies have resorted to wars to resolve external or internal conflicts, but sometimes they became so global that the entire world had to engage in the battles.
The brutal and criminal war waged by Russia against Ukraine has unfolded on a continent where peace is a hard-won value. With the onset of Russian aggression, many military and political experts began to speculate about the start of Third World War. But is this truly the case? World wars are armed conflicts of a global scale with unprecedented casualties and destruction. They have affected most countries around the world and were fought across multiple continents. Today, let's discuss how world wars began and what caused them.
Watch this!
The first war in European history that significantly reshaped the political landscape and revolutionized military affairs was the 30 Years' War. This military conflict raged from 1618 to 1648 and involved virtually all European countries. It began as a religious clash between Catholics and Protestants, but evolved into a struggle for political dominance on the continent. The states on the territory of modern-day Germany suffered the most, with up to two-thirds of the population perishing due to war, famine, and epidemics. The 30 Years' War played a crucial role in establishing the first system of international relations in history, known as the Peace of Westphalia. Some of its principles remain relevant today, such as the concept of state sovereignty and the equality of all states. The 7 Years' War in the mid-18th century was one of the most extensive conflicts of the modern era. Winston Churchill considered it the First World War. This war occurred not only in Europe, but also overseas, including North America, the Caribbean, India, and the Philippines. It involved all significant powers of the time, as well as most middle and small European states and even Indian tribes. Similar to the events leading to the First and Second World Wars, secret negotiations and the formation of new alliances preceded the 7 Years' War. It started due to Prussia's schemes to a leading role in European politics following the ascent of King Frederick II. Existing diplomatic alliances were severed, connecting France and Prussia and Austria with Great Britain, which led to what historians call a diplomatic revolution. The 7 Years' War is known for its extensive use of redoubts and fortifications, making it the first trench warfare, and its widespread use of artillery, marking it as the first artillery war. The war resulted in a colossal loss of life, with approximately 1.5 to 2 million casualties, which was an immense number for the time. A series of Napoleonic wars in the early 19th century could also be considered a world conflict. Napoleon Bonaparte aimed to establish military, political, and economic dominance in Europe, acquire new territories for France, and strip Great Britain of its status as a global leader. The Emperor of the French managed to subdue a significant portion of Europe, leading to 7 coalitions fighting against him. The Napoleonic Wars claimed the lives of at least 3 million people. After these wars, the Congress of Vienna established a new system of international relations. Many researchers consider it the earliest example of collective security, which remained in place until the outbreak of the First World War.
Watch this!
The First World War took place from 1914 to 1918, but the tensions between Germany on one side and France, Britain and Russia on the other had been escalating long before its outbreak. The German Empire was established in 1871, following Prussia's victory over France. Initially, Otto von Bismarck claimed that his state had no aspirations for political and economic dominance in Europe. However, as Germany grew stronger, it shifted its foreign policy priorities. Under the rule of Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany not only became involved in the struggle for hegemony in Europe, but also pursued global expansion. The Vienna system, established after wars with Napoleon, did not officially assign colonies to the metropolis to which they belonged. At that time, there was no unified Germany, so it missed the colonial division of the world and was deprived of access to overseas markets. To address its foreign policy issues, the German Empire needed to defeat France, England, and Russia, which had previously divided the rest of the world among themselves. Additionally, all the major powers sought to gain their share of the weakened Ottoman Empire. Two Balkan Wars preceded the First World War, during which the Turks lost a significant portion of their European territories. By 1914, two alliances of states had formed, and their rivalry laid the global foundation for the World War. The intent included Russia, Great Britain, and France. The Triple Alliance consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Later, during the war, Italy joined the Entente, while Bulgaria and Turkey allied with the German and Austro-Hungarian empires. Many historians believe that all major European powers were interested in starting a general war, as they saw no other way to resolve the accumulated contradictions. The formal trigger for the beginning of the First World War was the assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife on June 28, 1914. They were shot by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo. The political goal of the assassination was to detach the South Slavic territories from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and incorporate them into Serbia. Vienna presented Serbia with an ultimatum, the terms of which were delivered in harsh tones, demanding that the culprits be punished, that Austrian authorities be involved in the investigation, and that anti-Austrian propaganda be banned. Austria-Hungary's ultimate goal was to weaken Serbia, which was gaining influence as an alternative power in the Balkans. Vienna believed it could achieve its aims through diplomacy or a local war. After the assassination and the Austrian ultimatum during the so-called July crisis, there were still weak hopes that the conflict could be resolved diplomatically. Serbia accepted all the conditions of the ultimatum, except the most crucial one, which involved allowing the Austrians to participate in the investigation, as it touched upon the sovereignty of the country. Some governments believed that Serbia's firm rejection of Vienna's demands was due to Russia's support. In turn, Austria was pushed toward harsh actions by Germany.
Watch this!
After Austria-Hungary presented Serbia with an ultimatum, Russia decided to intervene in the conflict on Serbia's side and began preparations for mobilization. In response, German Kaiser Wilhelm II strongly advised the Viennese government to occupy Belgrade before starting negotiations. There was an intense exchange of telegrams between the German and Russian emperors. Wilhelm demanded that Nicholas II cease military preparations against Austria, threatening to declare war. Meanwhile, Germany was mobilizing troops near the French and Belgian borders. France declared that in the event of a military conflict, it would fulfill its alliance commitments. Attempts by Britain to reconcile the belligerents were unsuccessful. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Subsequently, events unfolded rapidly. On August 1, 1914, after the Russian government refused to halt mobilization, Germany declared war on Russia. On the same day, German troops invaded Luxembourg. On August 2nd, an injunction was presented to Belgium demanding the passage of German armies to the French border, with only 12 hours for consideration. Belgium refused. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France. On August 4th, German troops entered Belgium. King Albert I of Belgium appealed to the Entente countries, the guarantors of his country's sovereignty, for help. On the same day, Britain presented an ultimatum to Germany, demanding the unconditional respect of Belgium's neutrality. After the ultimatum's deadline, on the evening of August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany and sent troops to assist France. Ultimately, these events led to 8 European countries being at war with each other within a week: Serbia, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Germany, Luxembourg, France, Belgium, and Britain. It further triggered a chain reaction, expanding the conflict into a world war. 38 out of 59 existing states at the time were involved in the conflict. The assassination in Sarajevo was just the immediate trigger for the war. It was preceded by numerous underyielding factors, the most significant of which was the desire of the German Empire to dominate the world and the competition of national interests among the major European powers. The war involved close blood relatives who failed to negotiate peacefully. First cousins and grandchildren of Queen Victoria, Wilhelm II, Georg V, and their son-in-law Nicholas II, who was married to another granddaughter of the British Queen. So, among other things, it was a family war that led to many personal tragedies when close relatives found themselves on different sides of the barricades. Modern historians attribute responsibility for the outbreak of the war in decreasing order to Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Serbia, France, and Britain. As a result, the First World War became one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Approximately 10 million people died in combat, and over 5 million civilians died due to bombings, hunger, diseases, and military occupation. 21 million servicemen were wounded, and millions more perished due to the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire and the influenza pandemic that erupted towards the end of the war.
Watch this!
The First World War ended with the defeat of the Central Powers. Its outcomes included the February and October revolutions in Russia, as well as the November Revolution in Germany. Four empires, the German, Ottoman, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian, vanished from the political map of the world. The latter two disintegrated into several separate states. The New World Order was established after a series of peace treaties between the victorious nations and Germany and its allies. The most significant was the Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919. Hence, the new international system became known as the Versailles System. It was shaped by the political and economic interests of the victorious states, primarily France and Britain, while the interests of the defeated and newly formed nations were ignored. It laid the groundwork for the rise of communist parties and Germany's future revanchist policy. Germany bore the brunt of the war's losses, lost 13% of its territory, and suffered economic decline. It was held responsible for the damages incurred during the hostilities, and reparations were imposed. Germany was also prohibited from having military and naval aviation, a submarine fleet, and armored vehicles. Universal conscription was abolished, and the army was not allowed to exceed 100,000 soldiers. The victors faced the complex task of eliminating the threat from Germany and the new danger of the spread of communist ideas from Bolshevik Russia. They found a solution in creating buffer states. The independence of Hungary was legalized, the never-before-existing Czechoslovakia was established, and Poland was reconstituted, receiving Eastern German territories. The Baltic states were recognized. These buffer states became a permanent source of tension for Germany in the East and Soviet Russia in the West. Simultaneously, it was revealed that most Eastern European countries had territorial claims against each other. Soviet Russia was not invited to participate in the post-war settlement, did not sign peace treaties, and was not admitted to the League of Nations. One of the articles of the Treaty of Versailles called into question the legitimacy of the Bolshevik Revolution. Therefore, the Bolsheviks held strongly opposing views on the New World Order, considering it a predatory system. As soon as the condition of the Versailles Treaty became known, President Friedrich Ebert of the Weimar Republic stated that these terms and reparations would be impossible to fulfill. Under such conditions, long-lasting peace in Europe could not be secured, and a new bloodshed was inevitable. After reading the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, French Marshal Ferdinand Foch exclaimed, "This is not peace, it's an armistice for 20 years." And that's exactly what happened.
Watch this!
The Treaty of Versailles was signed on the anniversary of Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination. To further humiliate the Germans, the signing ceremony took place in the Hall of Mirrors, where the unified German Empire was proclaimed in 1871. Almost immediately after its signing, a campaign to overturn it began in the Weimar Republic. Memories of Germany's catastrophic situation at the end of World War I gradually faded. At the version of a stab in the back by corrupt politicians and Jews supposedly inflicted on the victorious German army gained increasing popularity. The country's foreign policy revolved solely around the Treaty of Versailles, and the government financed critical research on this issue. In the beer house of Bavaria, a young war hero named Adolf Hitler gathered crowds with his loud and mocking remarks about the sellout peace. Simple slogans of penchant for theatricality and the emotional leadership of the Nazi parties, Adolf Hitler drew the attention of ordinary people and later the German elite, military, and financial industrial circles. In February 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Hitler as the head of the government, the Chancellor. Soon, a dictatorship of National Socialism was established in Germany, which quickly evolved into Hitler's personal dictatorship. Strengthening his power without resorting to military confrontation, he began the dismantling of the Versailles system, continually forcing Britain and France to make concessions. In these years, a platform for the future war was created in Germany. Hitler intimidated the victors of World War I with the communist threat coming from the East and portrayed his country as a buffer between the West and Soviet Russia. The militarization of the Third Reich began. By 1935, Germany had abandoned entirely the military provisions of the Versailles Treaty. Universal conscription was introduced, rearmament started, and the army was expanded. Western countries did not react. In March 1938, Hitler carried out the annexation of Austria and then organized the Sudeten Crisis, the national movement of Germans in Czechoslovakia to join the Reich. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement was signed, December in Czechoslovakia. This treaty is considered the culmination of British and French appeasement policies. Upon his return from Munich, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain uttered his famous phrase, "I have brought peace for our time." Less than a year remained until the start of World War II.
Watch this!
However, Germany was not the only nation dissatisfied with the outcomes of World War I. The Versailles system could not be effective because it had led to two of the continent's most extensive powers, Germany and the USSR, becoming its victims. In less than 3 years, these two countries signed an agreement that restored their diplomatic relations and resolved all disputed issues. The Rapallo Treaty meant the end of international isolation for the Soviet Union and for Germany. It was the first equal treaty since Versailles. Afterward, these two nations started collaborating in the military sphere. From the early 1930s, the USSR, like Germany, began intensive preparations for a major war. Other countries did the same, understanding its inevitability. Just as before World War I, alliances of future rivals were formed. Germany, Italy, and Japan created a military-political bloc called the Axis powers. Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Thailand, Yugoslavia, and their satellites joined this bloc. Incidentally, after the start of World War II in 1940, Germany offered the Soviet Union to join the Axis powers. Stalin's closest associate, Vyacheslav Molotov, traveled to Berlin for negotiations. However, the signing of the pact did not occur due to exclusive demands by the USSR, which were unacceptable to Germany. 1939 was marked by intensive negotiations among all participants in the future global conflict. In March, the Third Reich finally occupied the remnants of Czechoslovakia and began demanding that Poland hand over the free city of Danzig and permit the construction of a road to East Prussia, a German exclave. Seeing the aggressive policies of the Third Reich, Britain and France began seeking allies to contain German aggression. Negotiations with the USSR were initiated. Simultaneously, Germany started to probe Russia's positions in hopes of improving relations and signing a non-aggression treaty. The Nazi government well remembered how World War I ended on two fronts 20 years earlier, and wanted to secure its eastern borders before clashing with the Western powers. Ultimately, Stalin decided it was more advantageous to conclude a pact with Hitler than with the Western democracies. Two dictatorial regimes chose to divide Europe. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, with its secret protocol, was signed on August 23, 1939, and 8 days later, the war began.
Watch this!
Once the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed in Moscow, Hitler issued an order to attack Poland. The immediate pretext for the commencement of active hostilities was the provocation by SS troops in the German town of Gliwice, which occurred on August 31st. German Special Service personnel disguised in Polish military uniforms attacked a radio station and broadcasted an anti-German message in Polish. An attack on a customs post and a forester's lodge was also carried out. Speaking in the Reichstag, Hitler claimed that Poland had launched an attack on Germany and declared war on Poland. On the early morning of September 1, 1939, German air forces launched a massive strike on Polish airfields and initiated an offensive along the entire border. On September 3rd, the United Kingdom, France, Australia, and New Zealand declared war on Germany. The Second World War had become a reality. On September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland and occupied its eastern territories. Since Russia did not declare war, it is considered that World War II began from them on June 22, 1941, with the German invasion. However, most Western historians are convinced that this is not the case. The invasion of Poland, as well as Finland, and the annexation of the Baltic countries are all components of the World War, and the Soviet Union, along with Germany, acted as aggressors. In present-day Russia, mentioning the collaboration of the Soviet regime with the Nazis is prohibited, and asserting that the USSR invaded and annexed independent states is subject to legal consequences. After Germany invaded the Soviet Union, an anti-Hitler coalition was formed. In December 1941, the United States and Japan entered the Second World War. 62 states out of the 74 existing at that time participated in the coalition, representing 80% of the world's population. The war was fought on the territories of 40 countries, spanning across Eurasia, Africa, and the waters of all oceans. The war resulted in the deaths of over 70 million people, with two-thirds of them being civilians. It was accompanied by massive destruction, the obliteration of tens of thousands of cities and villages, and immeasurable suffering. The Second World War concluded with the victory of the anti-Hitler coalition and the establishment of a new world order. It is known as the Yalta-Potsdam system of international relations. Conferences among the Allied states were held in Yalta and Potsdam to determine the post-war order on the planet. Europe became divided into two camps, the Western capitalists and the Eastern socialists. The victorious states established the United Nations Organization to maintain peace and prevent new global conflicts.
Watch this!
Right after the end of World War II, a conflict that would later be called the Cold War began. It was a global geopolitical, military, economic, and ideological rivalry between two blocs of states with different social systems. The Soviet Union was the center of the socialist camp, and the United States was the center of the Western world. The Cold War lasted for over 40 years, until the dissolution of the Soviet Union. While the Soviet Union and the United States did not engage in direct military conflict, their competition led to local armed conflicts in various parts of the Third World, which became proxy wars between the superpowers. The Cold War was marked by a race for conventional and nuclear weapons, which posed a threat of leading to a Third World War. Several times the world came close to catastrophe. Many consider the Cold War as the Third World War. Fortunately, it did not escalate into open armed conflict with catastrophic casualties like the First and Second World Wars. After the end of the confrontation, in which Western countries emerged victorious, it seemed like all questions were resolved and a major war would never come to Europe again. However, the establishment of Putin's authoritarian regime in modern Russia has once again put the world on the brink of a hot military conflict. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led many to see it as the beginning of the Third World War. Ukraine receives military and economic assistance from Western countries, which allows Kremlin propagandists to claim that NATO is already fighting against them. Russia's aggression in Ukraine is portrayed to the domestic Russian audience as a decisive showdown and new global confrontation between the West and the East. However, beside the war in Ukraine, there are other severe conflicts today that are causing panic in the worldwide community. The conflict between Palestine and Israel threatens to escalate into a wider conflict involving neighboring countries. Also, for several years now, there has been an ongoing confrontation between China and the United States regarding Taiwan. But currently, there is an even more significant and terrifying factor than during past world wars. Many of the potential rivals possess nuclear weapons. A global military confrontation could lead to a massive number of casualties and raise questions about the very existence of humanity.
Watch this!
Today, it's challenging to predict specific developments that we should expect or prepare for. What remains a fact is that authoritarian and dictatorial regimes are inclined toward escalating military actions to achieve their aggressive agendas. The task for the global community is to put an end to this and prevent a new global war, which could be catastrophic for all of humanity. The likelihood of modern conflicts leading to a direct military confrontation between nuclear-armed states and ultimately opening the door to a Third World War is a grave concern. Whether there can be winners in such a war is a complex question. The devastation and loss of life that would result from a global conflict would be immeasurable. The key is to find diplomatic and peaceful solutions to conflicts, to strengthen international cooperation and institutions, and to prevent the rise of aggression and authoritarianism through dialogue, cooperation, and the promotion of shared values such as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The maintenance of peace and the avoidance of a catastrophic global war require collective efforts, wisdom, and determination from international community. To be continued.